In church, if the pastors keep telling people what they already know, the people will not grow. Just got back from an Easter service, and I want to talk about some of the things that I observed and some of the things that I thought afterwards. But I want to focus on that. Satan is a very real spirit in this world. He's had 2,000 years to observe what causes a belief in Jesus to grow or to wither. Persecution grows it. Why? Because struggle and change and conflict causes growth. It's like weightlifting. Continually challenging yourself causes growth. But if you just go in, well, actually, there's three things here. If you challenge yourself, you grow. If you don't really challenge yourself, but you do something, you kind of just stay the same. And if you really don't do much at all, then you just atrophy. And so that's from a weightlifting perspective. But, okay, so that analogy doesn't look great. I just shot my own foot off because I was going to keep it with, here's a better way of saying it. If you don't use it, you lose it. Okay? And that's true of anything. If you're playing chess all the time, and you're in the zone and you've been playing for a while, you're better at it. And the more you play it, the better you get at it, etc. All those neural pathways are being built and you're just better at it. If you stop playing it for a while, atrophy sits in. Because what's happening is you're not being challenged anymore. Your brain is like, well, I don't need to use this stuff anymore. Originally, the guy had me doing this all the time, so hey, let's reorient ourselves to be really good at this. This is what we're doing. But if you stop doing it, you lose it. And I've noticed this seems to be true when it comes to the loyalty to the Spirit of God in the world amongst people. If you look at the Dark Ages, these are people who were being willing to be burnt at the stake. They made, in the Dark Ages, the Catholic Church and their persecution of Christians made the Roman persecution, it dwarfed the Roman persecution. And the amount of cruelty, the way they tortured, the Romans were they were cruel, but they were kind of quick about it. At least the lion in the arena will kill them pretty quickly. But they actually had torture devices. I can't even describe it if I want to upload what they did to what Catholics did to Christians who just didn't want to submit to the Pope as God on earth, which was a blasphemous title. Holy Father, blasphemous title. Jesus told us to call nobody Father. We have only one Father, our Father in heaven. So that means all the people who call Abraham Father are in sin, and all the people who call the Pope their Father are in sin. They're being disobedient. And so to call the Pope Holy Father, especially since Jesus said no one is holy except God. So it was literally twice the insult. And so for Catholics to make people submit to the Pope is just disgusting. And so, yeah, they were brutal to Christians. But Christians did not have a Bible for 1,500 years. And yet, under persecution in the Dark Ages, they were much stronger then than now, where there are Bibles. Heck, you could have a Bible on your little phone right next to you. And you go to church every week. And yet the Christians now are so weak in comparison. How did that happen? They have more Bible. More Bible equals better in the eyes of the church, not understanding anything. I was about to say this or that. No, just anything. I don't think they understand anything. When they get into it, let me tell you, here's the problem. All these pastors do not follow Jesus' example. They live in big houses, bigger than your average person in the church. They're parasites. Okay, they do not follow in Jesus' example. Jesus was borderline homeless. He was taking as much as he needed to live, and he gave the rest away to those who needed it. And that's how he lived. And they don't live in that example. How are they supposed to teach Jesus' example if they don't even live in it, is my point. They can get up there and say the words, but at judgment, what they're going to hear is, I never knew you. But I taught in your name. I did all these things for you in your name. I never knew you. You clown, you fool, go away. That's what they're going to hear. They fooled themselves. Pastors are self-deceived. Just look at their example. That's it. You don't even have to listen to a thing they say. Look at just how they live. What kind of car do they drive? Is it reasonable or is it vanity? What kind of house do they live in? Does it meet their needs or is it vanity? Is it ego? Is it pride? Is God their master or is their pride their master? Guarantee you 99% of pastors in the last 2,000 years are going straight to hell. They were bribed by the devil. They all have that conflict of interest. They get paid by their congregation. Of course, they're not going to say anything to upset the people. So you know what that means? Stagnation. They're not going to challenge the people that go there because they don't want to upset anybody, because they don't want to risk losing funding for their lifestyle. So what do? They get up and they tell people what they expect to hear. They do not challenge them. They quietly suffocate and strangle them. And that's what I'm seeing pastors in America doing, at least this past century. As long as I've been alive, I can at least say I wasn't here 80 years ago or 100 years ago, but I've been here for the last 42 years. And for as long as I've been alive, I've been seeing pastors doing this. Even as a child, I was aware of this. Why has a pastor got a big mansion? Why does he drive all these big, expensive cars? And yet we live in this, like even as a kid, I was aware of the difference between pastor, and then he talks about a Jesus who's basically borderline homeless, John the Baptist who's basically homeless, living out in the wilderness. All they care about is heaven. That's their highest priority. And when it comes to this world, they just did as much as it took to get by. And that's it. This world and the pride and the vanity of this world was not a priority to them at all. And it's obvious by their lives. And even the actual apostles, the ones that actually knew Jesus, actually listened to Jesus talk, actually quoted Jesus, the actual apostles, I need to make that clear for what I'm going to talk about in a couple minutes from now. The actual apostles also followed in Jesus' example. You didn't hear about them acquiring great wealth and making palaces. I know that's about a century later. Once or actually a couple centuries. It's once Christianity became legitimized, Constantine made it the state religion. And then this is when it really got bad in terms of the people who were leading the church were no longer dispersing money to those who need it the most, but instead were now giving it to themselves and hoarding it. You can thank Constantine for that. You see, once they ended persecution, and I'm not saying persecution is good, but there is a benefit to it in that it causes growth. That constant resistance creates strength. Complacency, a lack of challenge, atrophy. I was in a service today, and the pastor was talking so fast, it makes me right now, which I think I'm talking at a normal pace, it makes it seem very slow. He was blah, 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 you gotta do this. It's like he was just trying to get it done to get home to watch some sports game. They're big on that in the state that I'm living in right now, man. These pastors, all they care about is sports pretty much. And they let ChatGPT write their sermons for them. And I'm not even kidding. There's going to be a giant scandal later on that people are going to realize that during a certain time period, from about a year ago, or about now, for the next several years, pastors everywhere just started letting AI write their sermons for them. And they had their little notes, and they would just go down the bullet points the AI had for them. And you could tell that it's not them actually talking. There's no smooth flow, and the other thing is AI is very predictable. Anyway, the point is they care about their sports. They live in their big houses. They drive their expensive cars. They told the people nothing really beneficial. I really hate to think that. See, when I came into that church that day, today, imagine if I didn't have any belief. Imagine if I was on my last. Imagine if this was like, I just want to leave this world, and I don't believe anything, and I was in doubt and all this stuff. Was I fed? No. I walked into a church that offered me no bread, offered me no wine, and could care less what happened after I left. Hey, but they said their piece, right? And that actually literally happened too. They were doing their communion thing, and there was no one left at the door. I got there about 1 or 2 minutes late. I did the recording on my phone. I was literally talking about it. It started at 11:45. I got there like 11:47. And they just left the doors, so there's no one there for, I guess, communions. I don't know. And it's kind of, I'm really glad that happened. Because to me, the symbolism behind it is actually very powerful. I came into their church and they offered me no bread and they offered me no wine. But said, be well. But said, don't be hungry. And don't be thirsty, is what they basically told me. They give me well intentions, but they did nothing about it. The whole sermon sounded almost like, in the way he was talking so fast. I mean, really fast. Like if you sped mine up like by twice as much. It was uncomfortably fast. Unnecessarily fast. Yeah, now I'm intentionally like pausing more now. I think just to kind of show people that you don't have to talk like you're on a commercial on the Super Bowl where every second is like $1 million and you only got 10 seconds to make your point. Life is long. For most of us, life is long. We got plenty of time to talk about things and think about things. Slow, calm down. Focus on quality of words, not quantity of words. How about that? He sounded like a Christianity salesman, though. He was just making points about why we have to believe. I'm not even kidding. He's basically saying... Now, he didn't say it in these exact words. But you could very easily say he's basically saying this point. You have to believe. The evidence says so. You have to believe. Smart people say so. Smart people who've seen the evidence say so. So you have to believe. That's what I got from this. He didn't spend a second on what Jesus taught about fairness, right and wrong, good and evil. Nothing. And this is much like Christianity. It is benign of Jesus' bread. His bread was his teaching and his blood was his spirit. And all these people in this service, they're so worried about whether they got their cracker or their little fruit juice, but they don't actually have his actual bread, his actual teaching. They don't actually have the Spirit of God in them. And so they do these little rituals, almost like it's like the Catholic Church used to do, just to feel better about themselves, feel like they're saved. Because, hey, I did the little ritual and the pastor said this, and so I'm good. But they themselves don't know who Jesus is. They themselves have not received Jesus' Spirit as their own, as their Lord. And if you ever quote them anything in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they look at you with these odd eyes, like, where? I'll never get over it, man, when people think I'm quoting Gandhi or something. It's happened many times in my life. Neighbors of mine out in Kentucky, and I'm trying to remember where else. Anyway, it's happened at different places. I'll quote Jesus. Online, on YouTube. Yeah, of course. And you'll have so-called Christians responding and be like, why are you making up this new strange belief and philosophy? Who are you? And I'm like, I'm not making this up. Jesus literally said this in Matthew 6. And that is how blind most Christians are. They spend all their time studying Old Testament books, but they didn't just study Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Do you realize that's the only thing you really need to study? Did you know that? You might find some strange lesson in one of the other books, but Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the testimony of Jesus, is all you need to know. That's it, period. I strongly disagree, and you're strongly wrong. Was Jesus sufficient as the Messiah? Yes or no? Did he need extra teachers to come and help him? Or was his teaching sufficient? Was Jesus sufficient? Yes or no? Now, Christians want to say he was not sufficient. We needed Paul to come later to really do Jesus' job better for him and explain it to us. And so this is why the bulk of Christianity is lost, because they went down the path of Paul. Paul became their Messiah. Paul is who they followed. Paul is the letters they read when they're in church. Almost every church teaches out of Romans, Corinthians, some book of Paul's. They don't teach out of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You know why? Because the pastors are afraid. There's so many chapters they can't teach out of because it would condemn their own lifestyle. It would condemn their own mentality. So they don't teach out of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's literally one of the first... When I go to a new church, and I visited probably at least a couple dozen churches in my lifetime, I look at the pastor. How's he dressed? What kind of car? If I saw what kind of car he drove, that's even better. But you can usually tell by how they keep themselves up, what kind of car they drive, what house. And then later on, you find out that's even more evidence to the whole what's going on with this church. But the next thing I look at is what is he feeding these people? And if it's not out of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, I'm already very skeptical. And if after a number of services, if I have not heard one verse from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, I'm done with that church. It's basically just Judaism 2.0. It's Paulianity. It's you call it whatever you want, but it's not what Jesus taught. And so let me get back to that question. Was Jesus sufficient as the teacher of Israel? Israel is a symbolic word for all of God's people. It's not some genetic group of people. It's not for some people at a certain location. Israel, when it's used the way I'm talking about it, it just means God's people in the world. Jesus was the teacher. He was not just the king, but he was also the teacher of Israel. Was Jesus sufficient for the job of being the teacher of Israel? Yes or no? And if Jesus was sufficient, then we did not need Paul. Paul was just extra. We did not need all the other letters and all the other books. We don't need to go study lessons out of the Old Testament. Those are extra. They are not essential, which goes back to my original point, and hopefully I just proved that point. With the simple question, was Jesus sufficient as the teacher of Israel? Yes or no? Now, I've already done many recordings about Paul. I don't want to spend much time on that. Please go and listen to those so I don't have to spend another hour again in another recording. I can focus on newer material. Okay, but to quickly summarize, Paul never once quoted Jesus on anything. Paul never once met Jesus, never knew Jesus. He had an experience in the desert. A lot of people did. Heck, even Jesus did. It was Satan. Paul didn't know who it was. But it was miraculous. It was a miraculous sign. And watch out. Jesus literally warned us of people who might come back after he leaves and says, look, if they say, I saw him out in the wilderness, don't believe him, is what Jesus said. And literally Paul says, I was out in the wilderness and I saw him. And they believed him. Actually, no. To be fair, the apostles did not. They did not believe him. They did not accept him because they were already warned about these kind of things happening. Paul never once quoted Jesus on anything. And yet he had to keep calling himself an apostle because of his pride. Anybody who feels the need for a title suffers from massive pride. There are no proud spirits in heaven. Where does it say that in the Bible? Go back to my recordings. You can basically extract this. There are no proud spirits in heaven. That's the one thing that rules people out from this world into heaven is pride. A proud person will not ask for forgiveness. Pride is the root of pretty much all sin, excluding madness. Pride is the root of all sin. There are no proud spirits in heaven. The fact that Paul makes these giant, elaborate openings, they're ridiculous. I literally can't even read his books now, especially as a grown adult. I cannot read his books just looking at his ridiculous openings. Like, who would really waste a paragraph on all this gibberish and nonsense except a very proud person who loves hearing themselves or watching themselves write and wants to make themselves look smart to his audience. And he has to call himself an apostle. And that's the big red flag. Pride, right there. And if you feel offended by this, that means you have idolized Paul, and I am offending your God. I am attacking your God and your idol. And I don't care, because I'm tearing down idols. Jesus is my Lord, and his Father is my God. And Paul, I don't know him. He says many good things, but he never points to Jesus. He likes to use the word Christ. It's interesting. He refers to Jesus by Jesus' title, but not by his actual name. That's interesting. It's like how I talked in the past about how many of the deists who made America, they were just deists. They didn't follow Jesus. They just said they believed in a God. God is the title, but it's not who God is. It's just the title. It's like saying the king. Which king? Herod? David? Which king? If you keep using the word God, it can be very vague. It can mean anybody. Jesus is the mailing address of who is God. And so it's very, very shady when Paul is constantly saying Christ rather than Jesus. And don't get me started about 2 Peter. Oh my gosh. It was written in the same style as all of Paul's letters, but he's pretending to be Peter to give himself legitimacy as an apostle. It's ridiculous. Paul was a fraud. He was a fraud. He never once quoted Jesus on anything. He even in one of his own letters admits, when they ask him, why is he going off finding his own churches out on the outskirts rather than working with the apostles? He said he didn't want to build on someone else's foundation, meaning he didn't want to build on Jesus' foundation. Jesus built his church through his apostles. That was the foundation, Jesus. Paul went off because he didn't, in his own words, he didn't want to build on someone else meaning Jesus, someone else's foundation. He wanted to do his own thing. Paulianity, it led all of Christianity into idolatry. So I've spent enough time on Paul, and the reason I wanted to give kind of a little bit of a quick summary of that is because the pastor in this mentions, and this actually goes hand in hand with the recording I just did yesterday. This is cool. Where basically, okay, before I talk about what the pastor talked about, let me, and I'm sorry if I'm starting to talk too fast. I'm upset. If you hadn't told, I know. Chill, Daniel. Chill pill. Chill pill. We're here for days, months, years. You got all day to talk about this. You don't have to get it done before the game is on, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like all these other pastors. Chill out. Slow down. Okay. Let me slow down. I'll try to. Now I lost my train of thought. Maybe I should go fast if I feel like it, huh? I still wasn't going nearly as fast as the other guy did. Paul basically states that, miraculous signs. Okay, so yesterday I talked about how Jesus says that only an adulterous generation seeks out a miraculous sign. Jesus also says that you believe because you've basically seen these miracles, but blessed are those who believe though not seeing. He literally just said, you are cursed. You are cursed. You would only believe if you saw a miracle. It is only blind, stupid chance and luck that you saw the miracles. You were born at the right time in the right place. But that really doesn't mean much because blessed are those who believe even though they don't see. You know why they're blessed? Because they chose God for who he is, not what he can do. Let me say that again. For those who've had problems in the dating world so you can understand the parable here. The people who follow Jesus, though not seeing his miracles, are blessed because they chose to believe this, because they chose to follow Jesus. My sheep, they hear my words, they recognize my voice, they follow me. They follow him for who he is, not what he can do. But the vain and the foolish and the cursed, they will only believe if they see a miraculous sign. They only care about God for what he can do. That's it. They don't know who God is. They don't care. Can you do a miraculous sign? And that was pretty much the Jewish people who murdered Jesus in a nutshell. And even when he met their criteria, they still hated him. And that's the whole point. That was really the core of it. See, Jesus was doing miracles in that time. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about him to this day. Who would be talking about a peasant out in the middle of Rome had he not done something miraculous? But he even met the Jewish leadership's criteria of miraculous signs, and they still wouldn't believe. You know why? Because they hated him. Because they hated who he was. And this is why Paul never once mentioned. Paul was a Pharisee. He was just like the people who killed Jesus. He was just like it. I'm convinced that the spirit of Satan was so strong on Paul and deceived him. After all the persecution going on, Satan knew that you're going to have to corrupt the church from within, not from without. And that's where he started with Paul. Why do you think he came to him in the desert? Pretending to be Jesus. Yeah. Did you know the spirit of deception can do that? It can pretend to be Jesus. Did you know that? Just so you know. That's not fair. Whoever said this world was. It's a great test of who is a person and what do you want and who do you follow. Paul says that if Jesus had not risen, then our faith is in vain. And there's no point in listening to Jesus or following anything. He basically is saying it's futility, and that's wrong. You know, I would follow Jesus whether there was a miracle story or not. I would follow Jesus a resurrection story or not. I would still follow Jesus. What did I say yesterday? At some point in my life, I become certain about who God was, and when I hear Jesus talk, I know that this is the same person as who God is. A spirit that lacks hypocrisy, a spirit that is fair, a spirit that has empathy. When you know who God is, that is everything. And Jesus lined up with that. And that's why there were people in Jesus' own time who, before they even saw miracles, they believed. Because they knew who God was. But then there's a great many people who do not know who God is. They are not invited to the wedding. They are not invited to the banquet. That is why it doesn't matter. Even if he does miraculous signs, they won't believe. Well, Paul is doing something strange. He's saying, you have to believe, basically, because these things happen. And if they didn't happen, you shouldn't even follow it. Wrong. You shouldn't even follow Jesus if you can't believe that he rose from the dead. He literally set the stage for late game atheism. Paul. And he set it up so well too. Because now you've still got, what do you think all the pastors are basically atheists in disguise? They'll never tell anybody. Their wife is usually still Christian, and they make all their money off of. I've read a number of postings, and I remember even in this one book, lots of Christian pastors who are atheists, and talked about how there was this awkward time in their life where they wanted to change careers, but they still continued to be a pastor, even for like 10 years, because that's what they went to school for. That's what their income was. They were atheists, yet continued to operate as a pastor in churches for 5-10 years. And these are just the ones that are admitting it in like this one book that I was reading. You got to wonder how many pastors are out there where they just have drifted. They never had faith to begin with. They just had belief, and then they had that belief destroyed. But hey, they make a lot of money in this thing, so. And now some will stick around out of pity. Like Paul said, we are to be the most pitied if this didn't actually happen. And a lot of these pastors, they don't think that. But they'll take that bribe. They'll live that lifestyle that's nothing like Jesus. The pastors of America are what strangled Christianity in America. And the pastors of the world are what strangled Christianity in the world. The devil from within, not without, is what actually will be the end of Christianity if it does not change. It's kind of a catch-22 because if people who are ignorant about God go to learn about God, how are they going to know better that the people they're going to are bad for them? How do they know? They don't have the tools. Now they step away from church, they do something like me, go on an adventure for a while and study other things, learn that, and then come back to it. It's very plain now. You see it openly. Fraud, fake, doesn't believe, it makes lots of money off of it. It's very obvious when you've gone out and you've gone away and then come back and look at it objectively. Very obvious, very clear. Yeah, the message that I heard today in this church was, you have to believe, you have to believe, you have to believe. That is the weakest method for persuasion is force. Desire is so much more powerful. If somebody wants to believe, that is so much more powerful than trying to just beat them over the head and drag them and make them believe. You have to believe. The evidence says so. And what's sad is, and I don't agree. Desire can be both positive and negative, meaning fear is actually probably the most powerful form of persuasion because it shuts down a person's logic. It shuts down. They just immediately submit. So fear is a form of desire. They want to not be afraid. That's their desire. And so they'll do whatever it takes to end that fear. And so that's actually what churches used to operate off of. It doesn't really work anymore in the West like that. That's why you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, we don't want to talk about hell and all that stuff. But they kind of imply it. But force is what this lesson was. I like to come more from the angle of God's goodness, the promise of heaven, eternal life. I don't like to look at fear. And that's why, go back to my last recording, I talked about this, how Jesus never once said that hell was a place of eternal suffering where God just keeps beings alive so that they suffer pointlessly. Pointlessly. He says that hell is a place of judgment and destruction. It results in destruction, perish, loss, destruction. He never once mentions it is a place where beings are kept alive eternally to suffer. They come to an end. They go through a judgment process. They go through that life review after they pass. They go through the judgment. It's very sad. It's very, very hurtful. They get to see themselves from God's eyes for their entire life. And they give their consent for their own destruction, and they are destroyed. They perish. They're lost. They're gone. But there is no eternal suffering. God is not a sadist. God is not unfair. He does not punish temporal beings with eternal punishments, especially since they were made the way they were made. How ridiculous is that? The reason I felt the need to really highlight this error that Christian culture developed around the Dark Ages, because Jesus didn't teach this. Paul didn't teach that. That's why I was like, when I was going through this, when I did that recording, I was like, really, when did this begin? Because Jesus clearly did not teach about a place of eternal suffering. And I think it came out of I'm just guessing. I'm not the history expert, but I'm guessing it came out of the cruelty of the Dark Ages. It was already in the Middle Ages, so it was sometime before then. And in the Dark Ages, man, they were making torture chambers for Christians, and the Catholic Church was. And they were burning people at the stake and doing all other kind of cruel things. I'm pretty sure that's probably where they came up. It was some demonic priest, some pope, who's demon-led, who just liked to spread the little rumor of eternal suffering. Now, Satan and his angels, they will suffer forever. They are eternal, and they will suffer forever. Or I should say they do suffer forever is a more accurate way of saying it. But people, they're temporary. They committed temporary crimes. Temporary crimes deserve a temporary punishment. Not eternal. The reason I bring this up is so that it is absolutely clear I am not resorting to fear to persuade people. Because when you start to use fear like most churches do, you're now negating consent. It's called duress. Someone puts a gun to your head and tells you to sign on a dotted line. You're not choosing by your own free will to sign on the dotted line because this is what you would want to do. Now you're doing it because you have to do it because you've got the threat of hellfire on you. You can't afford to be wrong, so let's just sign on the dotted line. And that's the reason why I felt it necessary to bring that up in that last recording, just to address the issue of hell being a place where people suffer eternally versus a place that is temporal and judgment, and it sucks and they come to an end. So that there can be some consent in here in this, so that people can actually have space to think and breathe, come to the gospel gratefully, happily, the way it was supposed to be, the way Jesus taught it, you know. Yeah, Paul definitely spoke like a dragon. His message was very much hellish. If there are no miraculous signs, then Jesus was nobody and you shouldn't listen to him. Like I said, he's setting the stage for later atheism because what atheists have been arguing in more recent times is, well, we don't really have a lot of evidence in Jesus' time for him even existing, is a very common argument. And the argument is basically like, okay, so Josephus was one of the first characters to ever mention Jesus from what we have. Now, that's from what we have. I said in my recording yesterday that paper from that time wasn't known for lasting very well. So it could have been that there were other, and there probably were other gospel accounts. And what we have is copies of copies of copies, but we don't have that sequence before. We don't have the originals, and we don't have the originals up to what we have. What we have is like anywhere from 40 to 70 to 100 years after the events. So in that period, I remember in my 20s as I was studying this stuff, I was really disillusioned when I found out that the earliest mention of Jesus in anything that we have historically is from a man who was not a Christian, meaning he was not convinced or compelled. And this was, I'm trying to remember when, but it was like decades after I think Jesus was here. And then there was a later the church tried to forge it because they knew how bad it looked. The fact that there's literally no one in Jesus' time mentioning his existence. They're like, wow, makes it look like we just made this stuff up at some point. And so they actually try to forge one of Josephus's letters and he's saying things that a Jewish man would never say about how Jesus was the Christ and he was this and he was that, and all like the typical Christian rhetoric. And they forged this. It's a known forgery. No scholar accepts this letter that Josephus wrote as legit. And so that to me shows a lot of weakness on the part of the church trying to keep their power. But the point is, this is a matter of faith. I've talked about this before. And I've chosen to believe what I've chosen to believe. It's not like there's zero evidence. And it's not like there's Loctite evidence. I've just chosen to believe what I've chosen to believe. Nobody has to. You know, in the entire time Jesus was here, he was never here to rob people of their consent. Why do you think he said, blessed are those who believe though not seeing the miracles? It makes me wonder if in the original, before it was altered and butchered over decades, if after he got done saying, blessed are those who believe though not seeing, but woe to you who only believe unless you see a miracle, or something to that effect. He literally does the same as blessed and woe, or blessed and cursed for the rich and the poor being blessed and the rich being cursed. Woe to you, to the cursed. It's interesting that in the Bible we always see as but blessed are those who see, but blessed are those who believe though not seeing. Why the other half of that we've seen in his pattern is not there. That's really, you know why? Because it would be contradicting with what Paul said. That's why. I think that could have been some Christian cleanup at some point later on. It's just suspicion. I know, it's just speculation. But the point is, Paul is literally contradicting Jesus when Paul says that you should only believe because he rose from the dead. That's the only reason you should believe. Because if he didn't rise from the dead, it's foolish. You shouldn't follow him. You shouldn't believe him. And Paul's wrong. He's so wrong. Literally, Jesus said, the best way to follow Jesus is because you want to. And the worst, most minimal, most pathetic way to follow him is because you feel like you have to because you saw miraculous signs, like an adulterous generation. And so it makes you wonder if they didn't take that out of the Bible too, because it would have made Paul, again, wrong. I mean, there's still enough to do that. I do want to talk about something else now. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I want to talk about, so now that I've just pretty much hammered and criticized Christian leadership in most churches, I want to talk about people who are going to this church. I'm going to be a little bit more nice to people who mean well. And I'm sure there's even a number of people that keep going to churches that have felt some of the things I've talked about. Probably not all, otherwise they wouldn't probably be going. But people who mean well. It's always awkward when they mean well, you know? But they don't do well. They mean you well, but they can't help you. I hope you don't go hungry, but then don't give you food. So the question coming to my mind is, and it's actually not a question, it's actually more of a statement. Aren't they the ones responsible for keeping these messed up pastors in their positions? They kind of are. They accept it. They tolerate it. They don't criticize it. You know, a leader of a country is a very symbolic representation of the average person of that country. Especially in a more democratic system, the person was there chosen by the people. Now, I know we were given the choice between a giant douche and a turd sandwich. I know. But still, you could say that as long as people turned out to vote for that person, they didn't completely resent that person. So you can't say that they weren't a choice of your average person. So a leader is a representation of the people. So do the leaders of churches look like Jesus? No. They don't live like Jesus did. They don't talk like Jesus did. They don't think like Jesus did. There's no similarity between the leaders. No, okay, I don't want to say all churches. That's you know how that is. There's always an exception to every rule. The giant majority. How about that? And I won't have to keep saying this all. I don't have to keep correcting. Not all, not all, not all. I don't have to keep saying that for every single time I say the leaders of churches. So you understand. Obviously, there's exceptions. But the great majority. Do they live in big houses? They live in cars. You know why I'm doing this? You know why the pastors are going to hate me? Just like all the Pharisees in Jesus' time? Because they don't want to lose their lifestyle. Because they don't really believe there's anything behind this. And they're like, dude, if you're going to make me live like I'm on welfare just to be able to keep my job as a pastor of the church, I don't even want to do it. Then. Good riddance. Goodbye. You see what I'm doing? I'm rooting them out. There's no pastor that should be living better than any member of his congregation. Those who are first will be last, and those who are last will be first. Does that ring a bell? The 11 years when I was in Kentucky, I lived out in the woods with just me and my dogs. I had nothing. I lived in a home worth less than $10,000 and a car worth less than $1,500. But the messages that I recorded, I don't know if I'll ever upload them. They were my favorite messages. And who I spoke to? The deer, the birds, the trees, and Toby. If the only people who are qualified to lead churches have to live poor, it will melt away so many of the fakes. There's a reason why Jesus came and he was not a wealthy king, why he was a poor person. It melts away the fakes. There's a reason why John the Baptist was a person living out in the wilderness and was a homeless person. People knew this guy, he believes what he's saying. He's not standing to benefit from this. It's not a scam for him. It's not a racket. He really believes this. There's more authenticity with it. When you're talking about a life after this world, heaven, and if you can't let go of this world, then how much do you really think there's a heaven? And if you really don't think there's a heaven, then maybe you shouldn't be leading a church. By having very little when you live as a leader. Now I'm talking to the leaders either as an act of condemnation or as an act of edification, however you want to look at it. If you're sincere, then you need to live like Jesus lived. You need to let go of the big house and the expensive car. It's shameful. It's sad that I have to even be saying this. Okay. You know what it kind of reminds? Okay, here's what it reminds me of. I was watching some YouTube last night. And there's this one video, this one guy who was trying to look like he's big and important. And he filmed himself getting out of a helicopter. Probably wasn't his helicopter, you know what I'm saying? Like he probably just paid someone to hold a camera for a little bit for him to get out of a copter and then had a car drive up and a security guy open the door for him and all this stuff. And everybody on the video was clowning on him on how ridiculous it was because they knew he was a fake. And not only that, even if he wasn't, it's just so ridiculously pompous, you know? You may as well have just wore a crown, you know, and a robe and had a red carpet rolled out for you. And so these are people who lack that awareness of ridiculous. And so what I'm trying to say is, for those who don't have that awareness, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this. Maybe I'm giving away the secrets. Yeah, someone's like, dude, don't tell them this. This is how we've been able to identify the fakes for a long time. Here's why I'm saying this. Those who are proud, they won't want to live like this. They won't want to live modestly because they can't. Their ego prevents them from doing this. They are hellbound. And so what I'm doing is I am allowing everyone else to see everything a little more clear. Because it gives me great pleasure to watch these thieves squirm and struggle to try to keep what they've stolen. They have taken from God's people. They have stolen from God's people to live luxuriously off their backs. And it gives me great pleasure to make them squirm and struggle and know they have to give it up. I'm telling all pastors in America right now, you have to give up your big house. You have to give up your expensive cars. Go find one of the cheapest cars you can find that works. That is your new car. Go find one of the lowest prices houses in your city. That is your new house. And if you do not do this, you should not be a pastor. And anybody listening to him should go somewhere else and listen to somebody else. And these big churches that are being led by thieves and fakes, may you be poor. And the little churches who actually teach an authentic message, may people come into you and may you have an abundance. Yeah, for some time I have enjoyed knowing how to very quickly spot fakes. But I think it's time now to just put those little secrets on the table so everyone knows. And to start melting away all the fakes. I sometimes wondered, if it was made illegal to do anything religious in America, I find that it'd be hard to believe. I mean, we'd have to have a massive overhaul. Like some kind of a revolution or something that got rid of freedom of religion. And it would be very unlikely to see that in America. But I sometimes thought, man, if we had something like that and it was illegal basically to teach anything religious, you wonder how many pastors would just slip away. Well, we saw a little taste of that during the whole flu season, you know what I'm talking about, when everybody just stopped going and wore all the muzzles on their face. During that season, we saw how many churches were willing to submit to evil. And that's another problem I have with Paul I've talked about in the past. He tells you to submit to the devil. The devil put all the authorities there. And Paul says that that's God, and he was dead wrong. That's the devil. Jesus told us that it is the devil who's in charge of the authorities. It was the devil who handed him over, that he wouldn't be able to be crucified unless he was handed over by someone else of higher power, and he's guilty of a greater sin. He's not referring to God as Father. He's not referring to God. He's referring to the devil. It's the devil who's been behind all authorities. Why do you think they've always been so wicked? Why do you think it's a coincidence that every king and pope and everyone in history has always just been evil? What a coincidence. It was always the devil who was behind these leaders. It's the devil who's behind the authorities. I know it's scary, and that's why people, they don't want to hear it, because it's so scary. We're only here for a little while, guys. Of course, the warden of the jail. You think if God was running this world, that it would be this bad? You think that it would be... We're in the year 2025, and we still have homelessness and disease and hunger. You think if God was in charge of this thing, that we would have these things? Are you kidding me? Of course it's the devil who's been in charge. How could there be any doubt? This is the age of evil. And so these evil churches who follow Paul's evil theology, well, the authorities are there and God put them there, aka the devil, so we got to follow them. So they shut down and they stop teaching and they stop doing their thing, and they're fakes. Because it was made illegal temporarily to teach in a church. And they complied. They're not trying to get in trouble. When persecution comes, you're going to see 99% of all of these leaders just melt away. They're going to disappear. They're going to be one of these guys living in this big old house, they're going to have this blank look on their face. I've seen this before. I've seen it. This blank look on their face. Where was that pastor now? That person who got up in front of all the audiences in his nice clothes, who got out of his nice car. And where is that guy now? Persecution makes a church stronger. And stagnation makes a church weaker. Challenging new ideas and concepts keep a person stronger. Telling you the same old thing that you've heard all the time, you'll slowly starve. Yeah, lukewarm. And I can feel it. God is ready to spit this lukewarm out of his mouth. They are neither hot nor cold. This is why I chose to say, just thinking, after Toby passed last June, I understood that this was my staying. Like, I wanted to leave so bad. And I realized my staying is nothing about me anymore. I'm not here for myself anymore. This wasn't about my life anymore. I realized I'm here for a reason. Everything that I've learned, it was for others. I know, it's groundbreaking. Groundbreaking. When you're a young guy, look, when you're in your 20s, you get out of school and you focus on, okay, what am I going to do for a career? What am I going to do to survive? What girlfriend am I going to find? I mean, that's just how it is in your 20s. And that whole 20s kind of makes you kind of very self-oriented. It's just the way the world is, because there isn't some big political entity that's just saying, we're going to take care of you and we're going to make sure you are housed. And so you're made selfish just by the way the world we live in. It's not a world of provision. It's a world of dog eat dog, and so that's just how it is. I'm not trying to excuse selfish behavior. I'm trying to explain how so many people, especially guys, become so selfish early on, because if they don't, they die. They become homeless. They go hungry, and so that the 20s really kind of gets a person thinking about just their own life. And in my 30s, it changed. I got the dogs. I started thinking more what's best for them. What kind of yard do they need? That kind of stuff. And so I started thinking less about me, more about my dogs. And then when my dogs passed, it was kind of like there was no more me. And I'm just here. And so I concluded I'm now here for people. I'm here. I'm like a ghost walking on this world that's not really supposed to be here anymore. I already graduated. When Toby passed, that was done, man. If I had left that day, I'd be in heaven with him. And I'm not here for me anymore. I've chosen to stay for this sad group of people. As I laugh. Well, I'm laughing at the foolishness of it, And it shouldn't have to be like this too, So, anyway. I ramble. I think I'm already done with the sermon. That's when I start rambling about myself, is when I'm done with the sermon. Yeah, I would really wish that Christians were allowed to have not more authentic, actually authentic, there we go, not more authentic, wow, what a bad choice, actually authentic leaders, like the kind of people who led the early church, the apostles who led the early church after Jesus. Leaders, plural, meaning this is a lot. One person could not do all this, and I just wish that there were leaders more around the world. And I'm convinced that there are. I'm convinced that there are probably leaders, and they're probably not heard. They're probably not known. Why? Because the big spotlight is on the guys wearing the tuxedos, getting out of their little limos, or their vehicles that cost almost dang near much as a limo. That's where the spotlight is. And I'd like to see the spotlight go to other people. People you wouldn't even expect. I found little hidden gems from different people throughout my life. Yeah, that's right. I called some people a hidden gem. They didn't even know it. Just by their very spirit, by their very way, their mannerism. They lived by empathy. And they weren't dominated by pride. I'm thinking this person would be a better pastor than that pastor. In fact, sometimes when I go into churches, I'm like, probably 3/4 of the people in this church would be a better pastor than this pastor. Why is he up there? Leadership is only part of the problem. It is. It's a big part for people who are active in churches. So it's not a big problem for me, but it is a big problem I can see for churches is leadership. Now, again, I want to bring that point back. I want to see leadership in churches in America being led by people who live in the cheapest house, drive the cheapest car. In fact, that's how you should be able to identify who is the pastor in this house, in this house. Who is the pastor in this church? Go out to the parking lot. Oh, it's that one, man. Definitely that one. That thing looks like it's not even worth $100. Nobody's going to steal from that. That is the pastor's car. That's how it should be. In this evil world, it teaches you the other way around. The leader has all the stuff. He's financially invested in the thing. So he keeps the business going. But that's how the world functions, and the world is evil that we live in. It's profit-driven, it's greed-driven, it's pride-driven, it's evil. It lacks empathy. If I see a little cheap car, I'm not going to think low of that person. I'm going to be kind of surprised, really. I've never seen that. I've never pulled into a church, and the pastor of that church drove the worst car in the parking lot. I've never seen that. I've got news for you. Jesus said, foxes have dens, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He's literally talking about a time in his life where he is homeless. And John the Baptist was also homeless, living in the wilderness. They gave up their place in this world to advance the kingdom of heaven. And they showed it with their actions and with their lifestyle, which is why I go back to what I said. Anybody who hears this message has no excuse now to ever go to a church where the pastor is living better than everybody else. Stop going to that church. Go somewhere else. And if you can't find a church, then maybe it's time to start one. Maybe it's time to do something different. All I know is we have got to start boycotting these fakes, these frauds, these thieves. You know, when I was a kid, I always wondered, why is it Jesus kept calling them thieves, you know? There's all the different kind of ways he could describe people who were fakes or were claiming to be messiahs or anything like that. But he called them thieves because they're trying to take what belongs to God. And because they probably are taking resources from God's people. So, thief is a really accurate word. Really is. Fraud is probably right next to it. There are frauds who are thieves. They're using fraud to thieve. And more sinister, I was going to say more sinisterly. There's a new word for the day. Sinisterly. In a more sinister, sinisterly is better. In a sinisterly way better. Behind these frauds that are thieving is the devil strangling off God's people. When I walked into that church today, they never offered me bread. They never offered me a drink. I came out hungrier than when I came in. And what's worse than that, I'm reminded of Toby's last years. Toby had kidney disease, and it's a terrible condition where his body just doesn't process food the way it normally does, and so he could be getting food but not actually getting the benefit of food. And so I could give him the best food I could give him, but his body was just not processing it anymore. And it kind of reminds me if that isn't kind of like a glimpse of late game Christianity and Christians in the world, where they have their Bibles, they have all this food, okay, but they are not getting anything. They have kidney disease, sometimes it feels like. It's just an analogy, so obviously it doesn't fit perfectly, but it's the idea of they're surrounding themselves with sustenance, but getting nothing of value from it. And that is where the Spirit of God comes in. A church that has a Bible and is written by an AI, and that's going to come up too. We're going to see that. It's going to be Twilight Zone stuff. AI churches, okay? With a robot pastor. I'm going to have to make a recording pretty soon. And hopefully it's not as soon as I think. But I'm going to have to make recordings about, guys, stop going to churches with robot pastors. Okay? There is no Spirit of God in them. Church was meant to be Spirit-led. It was the church was built off the Holy Spirit. Not off words, not off a Bible. There was no Bible in the first century. The church was built off the Holy Spirit. And if the person who speaks in your church can't just speak from the Spirit, then they shouldn't be leading. I'm going to have to say this. Stop going to robot churches. And you know what? I'm noticing this too, that a lot of these pastors, all they care about is their sports team. and they're just trying to get their sermons done so they can go home. See, yeah, don't get me started on these guys who are working 1 day a week but making a ton of money. Oh, pastors work more than 1 day? Okay, I'm sorry, 2 days a week. They have the AI write their whole thing. And this is, I'm telling you, we're going to see this. Pastors just doing what AI tells them to. So, in a sense, we're almost already there. We don't have actual robots spitting out. We have humans spitting out what robots are telling them to spit out. And I'm saying, guys, you've got to stop this. Churches are meant to be led by people who have modesty, not pride. Who live lowly, not highly. Okay? They're also meant to be led by people who have the Spirit of God, not AI, who just regurgitates everything that's on the internet. Can you imagine if a pastor got up and said, instead of saying, he said, okay, in the service I was in today, he said almost like a dozen times, no exaggeration, AI said this, AI said that. What AI? And what is AI? It's just a gathering of everything on the internet. So why doesn't he just say, people on the internet said this? People on the internet, because it sounds so ridiculous if he said that. But if he says AI, well, that's the next God. We got to listen to that. It must be right. AI's never wrong. That's where we're headed. It's scary. Well, not for me. I won't buy into it. I'll be one of those stubborn old people. Kind of like racist grandpa. I know sermon's over. Now I'm just talking. So I had this neighbor. He's like 91 now. I can't believe he's still alive. Anytime I ever call or he calls me, I'm amazed he's still alive. Truly. He is well past the average lifespan. Most people don't make it past, much longer past 90. He's still alive. I'm amazed. And he's walking around and everything too. If I'm not mistaken, he's still running his mower. It's amazing. But anyway, what was I going to say? Sorry, I just got kind of distracted by thoughts of how's it going to feel like when he does pass? The world will feel different. He was the only person out there when I was out there in Kentucky. But anyway, what was I saying? He was very he had very racist idea. He used the N-word all the time, very naturally, casually. He was born in like 1930. So he is it 1930? Whatever it would make him 91. So it was close to like 19. Anyway, he's from a different time. Now he says it, and he's not hateful about it. That's just the way he talks. He's literally racist grandpa, and nobody really cares because of how old he is. The guy looks like the crypt keeper. He's almost on his way out. Nobody really cares. Now if a young person talks in a racist way, they're like, oh, you can't talk like that, But him, they don't care because they just know that's racist grandpa. Well, I'm gonna be like, kind of like that, but in like when it comes to like AI and all this other stuff. Everyone else is going to have like a computer like drilled into their head. They're going to walk around with like implants and stuff. I'll be the only guy not looking through some holographic glasses with some implant in the side of my head talking about how I miss the good old days when churches were actually led by spirit-led people, not robots. And then people are going to be like, oh, he's so old-fashioned. Yeah. Like First Church old-fashioned. New isn't always better. New could just mean more corrupt. So it's newly corrupted, new ways of being corrupted. Anyway, all right, I'm going to end this for today. All right, until next time.